Star Citizen is aiming to bring tens of thousands of players into the same shared universe, and the tech to achieve this might not be that far away. However, the current game world isn't designed to support even a fraction of that number. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about this since Chris Roberts dropped his letter from the chairman blog post several days back, talking about their aims with server meshing and that they should be able to support tens of thousands of players in the same server shard. This would be achievable once dynamic server meshing is available in the not so distant future. They're aiming for static server meshing at the end of this year, and if achieved, dynamic server meshing seems like a good bet for potentially the following year. However, Chris has a long history of hyping up big features that sound much more achievable than they really are. To his credit, he has delivered many of those big features into the game, they just took a lot longer than the original pitch. And a big part of Cloud Imperium games missing those projected release windows has been the failure to anticipate all the nuances and complications of the new features and systems, which I fear may be happening yet again with their plans for increasing the player count so dramatically. Even if their magical server tech can handle the load of tens of thousands of players, a simple thought experiment will reveal numerous problems that may require massive overhauls to most of the game. Now, the most important first step in trying to anticipate this problem is to figure out the average number of players per system. Currently, there's only one system, Stanton, with the second system, Pyro, hopefully being implemented at the end of the year. But is Chris imagining tens of thousands of players spread across the 100 systems, which is the ultimate plan for the game, or will those tens of thousands of players exist in the closer future once we have, say, Stanton, Pyro, Nyx, and Odin in the game? Giving Chris the biggest benefit of the doubt here and assuming that he meant tens of thousands of players with the entire universe built out to the 100 star systems, and assuming that tens of thousands of players was no more than, say, 30,000 players at a single time, that would mean that each star system, if it was equally spread out, would contain 300 players. And again, this is the most forgiving estimation I can make given the tens of thousands of players quote. And even with this estimation, the game world runs into massive challenges, which it's just simply not designed for right now. Looking at older MMOs that support thousands of players in the same shard, it's observed that most of the players end up hanging around just major hubs. Take EVE Online, for example, and their major trade hub, Jita. This single system could have thousands and thousands of players active at once, while some of the outer systems may only have a few players. In Star Citizen, Stanton, the current system where everyone plays, is most likely going to be a pretty big system with tons of traffic. It has 4 major planets with big industry and many moons and asteroid belts. Pyro and Nyx, on the other hand, seem like they could be dramatically less active, and even some of the other planned systems have things like single planet systems with even more remote and dangerous conditions. These less hospitable systems will inevitably attract just less players at the same time. So the hub systems, such as Stanton, will likely carry massive player counts. Stanton would have to probably support 1,000 to 3,000 players on average, and that's not factoring in big events that might boost these numbers even further. I was reading a Reddit post that was addressing the specific subject of the tens of thousands of players, and someone predicted that Stanton, with its current amenities, could maybe support 400 to 500 players, but even they had to admit that major problems would start to occur. Mission crowding would be an issue right off the bat, as it's already problematic at 100 players. Currently, package drop-off missions are the same spawn locations as bounty hunting missions, which overlap and create problems. You land to drop off a package and somebody spawns a bounty hunting mission, the AI ships spawn and target your landed courier ship and blow it up while you're just delivering a package. This happens due to the limited mission locations, and these limited locations create plenty of overlapping missions with bunkers and wreck sites, players getting in each other's way. This affects all derelict missions, outpost bunkers, delivery missions, and more. These location quantities would have to be increased massively just to handle the load, and likely the developers would need to make procedural tools to propagate enough of them, since creating even a single crash site location seems to take quite a while. Now, the in-space locations would be much easier to handle. Distress beacon type missions could be easily propagated to support as many players as needed, since space is massive and it wouldn't be much of an issue to just create a whole bunch of them, whether or not these are permanent locations or ones being spawned specifically for the mission. But then of course there are the event-based missions like Jump Town and Xenothreat. Those missions are definitely not designed with scalability in mind. Jump Town just doubled the size of its base, but it's comically too small to support even, say, a 4 times player count increase. More locations or even bigger facilities would be needed to support larger player populations, potentially even a system for limiting the mission invites to prevent too many players from showing up. Events like Xenothreat may even need to be more dynamic, spawning ship numbers that reflect the population count of the system, or even running multiple instances of the event, sending invites out in waves so that not everyone is trying to fight in the same crowded battle. Security Post Korea just got redesigned, but there's no way that that station would hold up under load. I've been there and I've already come across 7 to 8 active hostiles at once. It may just have to become one of many security post stations in the system where players could get missions to any one of them rather than everyone showing up at the same location. And I could go on and provide many more examples within the mission system, but basically I can't come to any other conclusion other than the entire mission system, and especially station or planet-based missions, would need massive overhauls just to handle 400 players in Stanton, let alone 1,000 or even 3,000. Let's talk about the landing zones. Most major landing zones on planets, space stations, and trading outposts are way too small in most regards to handle the increase in traffic. Now, hangars themselves, I believe, will be built with an instancing system where they really only exist to other players upon opening the hangar doors to the exterior of the station. But they would then probably need some sort of takeoff and landing timer to limit the time that those doors remained open to prevent spaceship congestion. So while hangars could be unlimited within the station, the hangar doors are limited at the moment, and it might even look a bit silly if these major landing sites have ships constantly landing and taking off from the exact same hangar doors. Landing zones might also need a queuing system as well when there's just too many players requesting to land at once. But beyond that, it may just simply be necessary to increase the number of hangars at pretty much every major landing zone and station to handle player influx. I mean, look at Grim Hex, which is a pretty popular location in Stanton right now. It has a very small number of hangars, and it's very hard to imagine that this station would function under even a small increase in player load. Not to mention, the ultimate goal is to have AI ships landing and conducting commerce at these locations as well, so that would also need to be accounted for. Trade outposts on planets would likely all need to be upgraded with subterranean hangars and topside doors that could employ a similar instancing system, otherwise they would get easily overcrowded with their minimal number of landing pads. We would probably also see a significant exacerbation with the amount of trolling. Station defenses and law enforcement would need an overhaul. I mean, they currently need an overhaul, but the increase in player count would make it pretty much mandatory in my opinion. The game has plenty of station trolling as is, and it would become super common given the bigger populations. The defenses would probably need a complete redesign. They're susceptible to being overwhelmed by too many targets, and they're easily avoided by criminals employing the most basic defensive maneuvers. More effective defenses would be needed. It might be worth designing beam weapons specifically for stations that are nearly impossible to dodge, or missiles that are extremely hard to avoid that only stations get. This would help avoid some of the criminal-based trolling. Additional systems may also be needed, such as station-based tractor beams to slow down ships, or even keep them from ramming into hangars that they aren't permitted to land in. I think these types of upgrades would become necessary to avoid stations and landing zones becoming bigger hotbeds for extreme trolling. Then of course there's the likelihood of overcrowded station interiors and cities. It might be necessary to make multiple instances for city and station interiors to avoid terminal crowding. Perhaps even a mobiGlas system that can plug into some of the terminal interfaces, as many shops only have a few terminals, which would quickly get overloaded, especially the ASOP's terminals in certain stations. Upon entering a city from the outside, like say at New Babbage's airlocks, players could see and join one of multiple instances running at the city. Groups and parties of players would have to be moved to the same city instance. Now, fortunately, there are quite a few events and activities that are pretty safe or easily expandable to handle massive population increases. Mining, which takes place in asteroid belts or on planet surfaces, is not really based on specific locations, so that seems fairly safe with maybe minor tweaking as needed. The new salvaging gameplay seems like it could scale relatively well, perhaps with the need to increase the number of salvage locations or even add in some planet-side salvaging locations to places like Hurston, allowing players to roam around the massive surface of these planets looking for wrecks. And of course, there's all kinds of other nuances and systems that would be affected by larger player population increases, but these seem like the most obvious to me. The mission system would require most of the work, in my opinion, to do big overhauls of mission propagation and location-based propagation as well. Now, obviously, none of this is a major problem in the short term, and without question, CIG will limit the server size until the world is actually designed to handle bigger populations. That said, it is hard to ignore that a huge portion of the game's current design just simply won't function at scale, even at what I consider to be the most forgiving interpretation of Chris's player count numbers. And of course, this is frustrating to a fan, as Star Citizen's failure to anticipate its future design has led to many big slowdowns and tons of time spent redesigning the game. The current systems that would need overhauls to function at scale would likely take a massive amount of time to rework properly and test. And it's hard to know if these aspects of the game are even being anticipated already, or if it's going to be one of those, whoopsie, we need another year or two to build out things to scale. Star Citizen has a weird top-down, bottom-up game design process due in large part to needing to deliver ships and aspects of the game to players who have funded the project well before the systems to support those ships are even close to being implemented in the game. It's led to tons of mistakes and necessary redesigns along the way as the game gets built out further. And it's because of this that it's absolutely in the developer's best interest to test server population loads as early as possible so that they can design the rest of the game's systems with all of those lessons learned. Even last year's increase of 50 players to 100 players in Stanton showed us that additional problems with the mission system would arise. And in my opinion, once dynamic server meshing allows for a population increase, it should be increased as soon as possible to test the limits and find all the problems that will arise. Based on this video's somewhat simple thought experiment, it seems like there's going to be a lot of work and redesign needed, and I hope that's being anticipated properly for the future systems. Such as Pyro's single massive space station. Hopefully it has tons and tons of hangars for all the ships that are going to need to dock and undock there once server sizes increase. Anyway, I could easily keep listing examples and dig deeper. There's certainly a mountain of UI work that would be needed as well, but the point of this video is to explore the gravity of work needed to achieve the massive population increase. Even if we assume that, say, dynamic server meshing works amazingly well and gets implemented earlier than we thought possible, the game is nowhere near ready to support that population increase, and the devs have simply tons of work outside of the back-end tech achievements. Just the simple front-end things like having enough mission locations would need to be addressed. Now, personally, I think it's fun to think about all these game design challenges. Star Citizen is trying to achieve things that pretty much no other game has tried to do in the past, so they're running into all these problems for the first time for the most part, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it. How many players do you think Stanton could support before its current system completely breaks down? And what other areas of the game do you think would need to be totally overhauled to support such a massive population increase? Let me know in the comments, and also check out my latest coverage of Chris's letter from the chairman here. There's a ton of info and exciting stuff that's covered. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.